Good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled, Why Medical Device QMS and UDI Data Quality Matters. My name is Sonia Hunt and it's my pleasure to be your X Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation will be a fireside discussion with our speakers and will also include a Q&A session right after their discussion. This webinar is designed to be interactive and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and comments throughout this presentation by using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel, and that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require immediate assistance, please contact me at any time by sending me a message using that chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for you for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank ReadTech, who developed the content for this presentation. ReadTech is the provider of best-in-class information-based solutions and services to meet the needs of the life sciences industry. They enable innovators to accomplish more by helping them understand the nuances of regulatory requirements, create product data management strategies, and meet compliance deadlines on time. Their customers are located throughout the world and include a wide range of medical device manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies. The corporate mission is to advance humanity by delivering better outcomes to the innovation community, and ReadTech is a LexisNexis company. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to your host for today's webinar, and he is Gary Sainer, Senior Manager of Information Solutions Life Sciences with ReadTech. And there he is. Hello, Gary. Gary is a subject matter expert on medical device unique device identification and other structured content reporting to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. He has over 30 years of experience in software development, process management, and data administration, with the last 15 years focused on the life sciences industry. He serves as co-chair of the industry's structured product labeling technical team and on the advisory board of the Medical Devices Group. So there we have Gary. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our panelists for this great discussion. First, we have Terry Reed. She is the Chief Strategy Officer at Symmetric Health Solutions. And there's Terry. Hi, Terry. In her role at Symmetric, Terry continues to advocate and implement UDI adoption and influence the domestic and global implementation of device data standards. Terry formerly led the Unique Device Identification Program as FDA CDRH Associate Director of Informatics and oversaw the inclusion of UDI in health IT standards and federal regulations. Next, we have Ben Bancroft. He's a medical device guru at Greenlight Guru. There is Ben. Hi, Ben. Ben is an experienced quality systems professional in the medical device industry, specializing in compliance activities such as audits, CAPA, MCR, and deviations, and currently a holder of ISO 13485-2016 lead auditor qualifications. His prior chemical background focused primarily on medical and organic-based chemical products. And next we have Mark Wasmuth. He's the CEO of GMDN Agency. There is Mark. Hi, Mark. Mark provides leadership for the Global Medical Device Nomenclature Agency, GMDN, serving healthcare authorities, healthcare providers, manufacturers, and others with a universal naming system used to exchange medical device information and support patient safety. So that's Mark. And next, finally, we have Rich Casera. Where is Rich? He should be coming there. There he is. He is the CEO and President of Symmetric Health Solutions. Rich is the CEO and co-founder of Symmetric Health Solutions, a healthcare supply chain data aggregation, cleansing, and enablement company with products used by over 600 hospitals. He specializes in healthcare provider back office data management analytics, procurement, and inventory management. Now, it's my pleasure to pass over the mic and the controls over to Gary so that you can start this great conversation. So Gary, when you're ready, you may begin.
Well, thank you very much, Sonia. This is a pleasure. We're so excited to bring this panelist together and talk about this topic of data quality. There's a lot of buzzwords that we have, at least coming across my email. I'm sure it comes across your email as well. I don't think 2 days go by without some kind of email promoting data quality for this or that. And there's so many different systems and processes connected to data quality. It would be here like the next 3 or 4 days to cover all these topics, but today we want to focus in on quality as it relates to some of the quality management systems that you have, and specifically looking at the unique device identification data connected with medical devices and how that data goes from being born digitally and being managed through the local manufacturing sites and then all the way down to downstream users. So there's a lot of topics that we'd like to touch on. I believe what we'll do here, just to kind of manage the scope, is that we'll look at the US and FDA first, kind of focus on that as a first set of discussions, and then we do have some interaction and questions about how this conversation changed when we look at the European Union. So there's a couple slides that we want to go through here in the beginning, and then we'll have a format of question and answer. I'll pose a question, and then we'll go to some of our panelists for those answers. Before we get started, I do want to share this slide. It's kind of a foundation slide for our discussion today. It talks about how the data flows from, and specifically this has to do with UDI data, but there are a number of standards that must be adhered to on the left-hand side that need to be selected. In some cases, you have to subscribe to these agencies and so on. But based on those standards, manufacturers need to put data set together and communicate that data, report it to health authorities to gain marketing approval. And there's actually a second pathway where that product information is included on the actual product in a label. So the regulatory pathway and also the physical distribution pathway through production. And then there's another wave. There's actually multiple waves of downstream users. These data aggregators that are able to pull that information together, structure it, harmonize it, link it, and it's used many places. So it goes into electronic health systems. So those systems that my doctor looks at, when I go in there, they pull up a tablet and they have software that they work through and ask questions and here and there, record my history and so on. A lot of that information is fed from the data aggregators and making that available. And then we have the whole host. There's a lot of downstream users: physicians, pharmacies, clinical trials, patients, and so on. Even to the point of using this information in other financial activities, payers, insurance, and reimbursement sort of thing. And then in the bottom right, we have a lot of registries and traceability in play that uses a lot of data. Now, I've kind of presented this as a one-way flow, but that's not the whole story. There's feedback that comes back from those users back to you as manufacturers regarding that, and it might be in the form of various comments. You might be doing surveys. You might be doing post-vigilant or post-surveillance activities, and other post-marketing activities. Or it might come back as a complaint, adverse event report, that sort of thing. But there is feedback, and all of that helps to fine-tune your product and increase the safety. Now today we have representation up here on the left. The standards, GMDN is one of those standards, and Mark is going to lead the charge there and represent the standards. Green Light Guru, Ben is very familiar. Ben rather is going to be covering the quality management system and other types of management of those documents. I'll fill in for the various communications and reporting to health authorities. And on the downstream side, both Terry and Rich are very knowledgeable on how the downstream users use that. So we have a very good set of panelists here. and I want to get started with our first question. What is the impact of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration transition from the quality system regulation to ISO 13485? So, as you know, this topic has been around for a number of years, kicked around, and the FDA is making some very good progress recently. And this is fits very well in Ben's court. So I'm going to, ask Ben to go over some information here on this new proposed regulation that's about to be rolled out.
Thanks, Gary. So as you can see, guys, on the screen, the FDA have now proposed this rule back in February of this year with regards to transitioning to a more harmonized approach to the FDA CFR 21 CFR 820 towards that 13485 2016 quality management system. The adoption aligns that language that we're very familiar, if you're already familiar with that ISO standard, to bring that understanding of those two different requirements into a more concise way. While most of the proposed rule does remove items from Part 820 by referencing the ISO standard instead, there are additional sections that are going to be coming along as part of that, and they are listed on the screen. The link that we've provided sort of helps guide you in terms of those specific sections and where there are additional documentation alongside that. When we do finally get to a point, though, when we're going to look to adopt this proposed rule, when it's actually taken in as regulation, and we'll have 1 year to be able to implement that within our quality management system. So if you are already ISO compliant, this is going to be a slightly more straightforward journey for you if you're covering both requirements at once. But for those that are trying to explore that additional requirement in ISO while already following QSR, there may be some changes that may come as part of that as well.
Yeah, Mark, I think you're certainly aware of what's going on here. How does this fit into, becoming the FDA becoming a little bit more in line with some other health authorities?
Yeah, Gary, it's a good point. I think this really is good for harmonization. The US is really guiding manufacturers to align into a kind of global market. Those larger manufacturers will already be familiar with this ISO standard. And I think it would just allow perhaps US-based manufacturers only, would be allowed to sort of look at more wider field for their markets for devices. So it's all good for harmonization, yeah.
Yeah, so for the US companies adhering to, or actually any company adhering to the current quality system management, it's going to be a significant change. In some cases, it'll be some new alignment. I do also want to mention that there are a number of regulations, including the current quality system regulation about halfway down the screen, where if you were to do a search for UDI, you'll find UDI popping up in these particular regulations. And when the UDI rule came out in 2013, there was inclusion of some UDI requirements in each one of these. So if you had a Venn diagram of UDI data and regulations that is part of your quality system, this would be the area that shows the intersection. So for medical device reporting, corrections and removals, quality system, design history record, complaints, and medical device tracking, and so on. All of these have references to UDI. Now, these are long-standing regulations that have been in place, but with the final rule, there was this added element that when UDI is available, it must be included in these various reports. So I just wanted to highlight that. Now, it appears that if you look at the wording of the amendments for the QSR amendment that's being proposed, it appears as though those requirements for UDI to be included in these particular functions remain in place. So the references to UDI doesn't go away, but it might be just packaged a little bit differently, the different wording when it's including with a 13485. All right, so let's move on to the next question. How do product class and other product identifiers affect what you must do before and after a product is commercially distributed? So Mark, maybe you can help us out here, taking a look at identifiers, and then I'm going to ask Terry to add some additional comments. Oh, Mike, I think Mark, you're on mute there.
That's a bad start. Okay, so
There
you can
we
see
go.
on the UDI, the device identifier, we all know as being the key identifier, which links all of our other data elements together. And there's a long list. You'll be familiar if you've submitted data to the Good ID, all those requirements, and that's not going away. Other countries are adopting the same or very similar data set. So we can see that lots of information to be brought together and provided to a central product listing, which the Good ID is. We need to know that where is this information coming from, because not all of it's going to be generated within your own organization. And so we need to look at systems which we can introduce into our quality management system to help maintain these data sources, especially when they're due to change. Obviously, I've got in my mind that when the GMDM terms for your product might change, but there's obviously other bits of information that might change, and we need to identify in our organizations who is responsible for this information, and do we have processes in place to help us manage that, and does that integrate sufficiently into our existing quality management system to help us organize this and to make sure we're getting the right data feeding in into that process, and actions are taken in a timely way. And you may know, some of these things have to be, as Gary says, as part of the existing CFR regulations for the FDA. That those requirements are there to keep that data up to date. So you need to get that in place. You need to have a process in place which is able to be audited and checked on a regular basis.
Yeah. So I think, at least my takeaway is that in many cases, this dictates how you bring products to market. Certainly class drives that. And then to your point, there is not a one-time and done sort of thing. There's some maintenance that go on. Many of these are externally sourced, and those repositories change over the course of time. They're dynamic. And then some others are a little bit more static. And this whole set becomes a little bit of a can of worms. And Terry, I think your company does some organization here. Can you share that?
Yes, thank you. So in context, we've been talking about the regulatory side of things and what goes into Good ID. There are a lot of identifiers that are not in Good ID. Some code sets that hospital use like UNSPSC and others. And so the vision for the device identifier of UDI back in the day in 2006, when the international regulators came together, was that this identifier in the center would be the link not only for other identifiers, but for anything about those products. And one of the things that Symmetrics has at the core of our competency is to match that UDI-DI whenever it's available to any other attribute about that particular device. We have 400 attributes for many of our devices that we identify. So just to realize this is just a subset that you're seeing here, and that the UDI-DI is really meant to be the center of all the attributes about a particular device.
Yeah. All right. Very good. Now let's, if you don't mind, providing some more information about a couple of those fields. There's this classification, device class and codes and so on. You're very familiar with the FDA's management of these particular things. Could you share a little bit more information about, those particular identifiers?
Yes, so these are FDA product code and the classifications that are associated with it. A product code gets assigned. It's a regulatory requirement again. To each assignment of a product code, there are classifications. Class 1 is low risk, class 2, medium high risk and class 3 is high risk. Again, those are things that are really important for getting your device cleared or approved. You have to assign a product code. You work sometimes with the pre-market side of FDA to make sure they'll verify that that product code is accurate, and you've listed some things to consider here on this slide. Product code, if you're just thinking of the identifier UDI is for items. Product codes are intended to group items. Those two things are interdependent. There are some cases when you need to know the exact identity of a device, for example, a recall on a specific product. But maybe there are times when you need to know information about a group of devices with similar characteristics, or that go to the same panel at FDA. That's when you're using the classification. So people get this mixed up and don't really see the distinction. And so I think throughout this presentation, I may come back to this. We're talking about items with UDI. We're talking about groups of items with similar characteristics when we talk about any kind of classification, whether that's product codes, GMDN, or other types.
Yeah, very good. So really good additional information there on the class and product codes. I think, Mark, you had some additional information. If we just jump into the GMDN code and how you find one of those codes and how it's actually maintained over the course of times. I know this is kind of a dynamic database and something that you deal with every day.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I do know that some of the manufacturers struggle a bit to maintain their information about the GMDN. One of the things we're spending a lot of time on in the future is making sure manufacturers are keeping them up to date, when the data changes. So I'm not going to go through this flow chart, but it represents an example of how you might, as an organization within your quality system, have some kind of flow chart or some procedure to keep yourself up to date. And this one represents GMDN, but I'm sure you need to make sure, definitely need to make sure that you're covering, all the information which you're gaining from outside your organization, and then, associating with your UDI/DI before submission either to the FDA or other regulators or your customers, because definitely in the future, your product information is as important as your product. If your product information is not in front of your customers in a way they can use that usefully, you're going to find you've got problems. So get your processes in place and have someone responsible and build a system of quality around your data, and then you should be okay.
Yeah, I think that's really good. We have some clients that find a GMDN code and it might be around for a number of years. And then there's an update to the record. They go ahead and submit that update to the FDA Good ID database, and then all of a sudden it's rejected. So this is a situation where I think a particular term might be deprecated and replaced with some more granular, sub-child terms, and it happens periodically. So I think this is the intersection of UDI data being managed correctly and also having your quality system procedures in place so that you can proactively and at least follow a particular procedure in updating that GMDN code. And then I think ultimately, as you might have alerts that come from GDM, then if it's applicable to your particular code, you can be proactive and not be surprised when you actually submit an update record and don't have any problems in the future by using current values. So I think this is really good takeaway on UDI. For time, we're going to move on to the next question here. What are the considerations in storing, registering, and maintaining device information in QMS and UDI systems? Ben, I'm going to ask you to cover some of the the broad functionalities of a QMS system and how data is stored and managed?
As many are already aware, we cover quite a broad range of documentation when it comes to managing a quality management system, be it product-related documentation, things that we need to submit as part of regulatory submissions to FDA, as well as our sort of EU counterparts as well. It's critical to have current content and manage that content with a governance policy. Maybe you want version controlling, very much how systems such as Greenlight Guru utilize the eQMS system to maintain and control. So you have something in a single point of truth to be able to retrieve simply and quickly when you need it at that necessary point in time. The graphic on the screen just sort of accumulates that into a very descriptive way visually for you to understand like that quality management systems are broken down into those different compartments, but they're not intrinsically separate on their own. They're all linked to one another and they all lead to the same goal.
Yeah, very good. Now, there is a similar concept when we move over to UDI data management. Here we're looking at, as you mentioned, some of the documents, version control, keeping it current and so on. And there's a similar type of approach when you look at UDI data management. Now, the one difference is that UDI data management is very structured content, a lot of data elements and so on, whereas that QMS system would have documents and the management of the document level and version control, ownership, approvals, and that sort of thing. A lot of those concepts are the same, but now the scope is focused in on the actual UDI data elements. So there's this discipline or this UDI data management function that has many times linking to source repositories. So your actual data used for other reasons throughout your company to actually manufacture parts and put production in place. So there's many times master data management and enterprise resource planning and so on. But the information about a product is usually found in multiple places. It's not typically in one spot. QMS will have some data, labeling will have regulatory affairs and so on. But UDI data management is typically linked to those repositories, but it becomes the single source of truth for the data set that needs to be reported and maintained for a particular product. There's a lot of functions here. Won't go into them. You can go back and take a look at this, but it has some similar concept of being the single source of truth that Ben was talking about and having it current, making sure it's fresh and that you do have data owners that are able to maintain this over the course of time. All right, with that, let's take a look at the actual data that is managed by these systems. So there's a number of fields here, 64 fields that the FDA Good ID makes available. Some of these are required to be submitted. We certainly won't take the time to go into each one of these, but there's various categories and identifying the product and the manufacturer, some regulatory information, safety and packaging, and some other characteristics that need to be recorded. Now, some of these were originally identified as being optional, and I think the FDA intended that to be more conditional. You know, if you have it, please submit it, sort of thing. And certainly this list is something that you're very familiar with, Terry. And I know there was some feedback and comments from industry when the class 3s and class 2s started to have their data collected and made available in Access Good ID. And there were some questions about, yeah, well, we would like some additional fields to be included. Could you just give a little bit of history there and what the FDA's approach is in trying to make some of these present and included and not do a minimal type of a report, but more of a comprehensive report so that, you know, the downstream users are able to collect and see the information that they actually need. So if you can just give us a quick update there.
Sure. like a flashback in time really quickly was that, you know, we were trying to anticipate every single data field, you see them all here, how people were going to use them in healthcare, what manufacturers were going to, you know, have to pull their all the sources together. And in some cases, we hit the mark. We collected, you know, what is useful to downstream users. In other cases, as with catalog number and device description, and actually I would put contact information on there as well. Those are real barriers to adoption because we learned really quickly that catalog numbers are what people have now, and UDI DIs are things they will you know, have in this new world, and they have to match between them. And if you don't have the old thing, you can't match to the new thing. So that's really important. And all of this and all the rules, there is an FDA Good ID data elements reference table that's kept up to date. So that's important. And I'm going to talk about later in a slide really key fields that are specifically important to healthcare. So,
Okay.
So stay tuned.
Yep. All right. We'll look forward to that. Moving on to our next question then. Actually, Sonia, this is going to be a good point where we run our two polls. I think you have two poll questions lined up, and are you able to run those now for us?
Yes, I will do that right now. Everyone, you'll see appear on your screen the first poll question. I'll give you 30 seconds to do this first poll question and the second one. So this first poll question that we have here is, what aspect of regulatory activity at your company is very challenging? So please go ahead and check all that apply. Is it maintaining SME for regulatory compliance tasks, or is it establishing scalability for QMS workflows, or is it managing UDI data submissions outside of the US FDA? So pick all that apply. I'll give you a few more seconds to complete this poll as it's done in real time. So I'll be able to close the polls and share the results with everyone before we go on to poll question number 2. So please, everyone, please go ahead and cast your vote right now, please. I'll give you a few more seconds. That looks like the majority of our audience have cast their votes, but we have a few more people there still have not decided. So please go ahead. I'll give you a few more seconds. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating in poll question number 1. Now let's take a look at the results as I close the polls. Okay, so here are the results. So we have here, it looks like, oh, my eyesight is really bad. 61% say maintaining SME for regulatory compliance tasks. Then we have 41% that chose establishing scalability for QMS workflows. And then 46% said it looks like managing UDI data submissions outside of the US FDA is a problem for them. So thank you, everyone, for poll question number 1. Now let's jump on to poll question number 2. Okay, so for poll question number 2, once again, we'll do that same 30 seconds I'll give you to complete it. And this one here is overall, which sentence accurately reflects how your UDI data is currently managed and how you submit records. Was it we work with a third-party SaaS platform for these services, or we work with a third party and perform some of this work in-house, or is it we do this work exclusively in-house? Please go ahead, cast your vote. Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds there. Looks like everyone knows what to do here. Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for participating in our final poll question. I'm now going to close the polls and take a look at the results. Okay, so here are the results. We have 17% saying a third party sees platform for these services, while 22% says a third party and perform some of these work in-house. And then we have 61% who say we do this work exclusively in-house. So thank you, everyone, for participating in our 2 poll questions. Now back to Gary and the panelists for the discussion.
All right, thank you, Sonia. Moving on to our next question. A little bit long here, but here we go. The FDA required UDIs for some devices as early as 2014 with the intent of adequately identifying devices from manufacturing through distribution to the patient use. So there's a lot of history, a couple years going by. The question is, have you seen any impact on post-marketing activities? What about industry adoption, medical device reporting, recalls, any improvements to the quality of care? Rich, I'm going to ask you to start our discussion here on the report card, and maybe give some insights on what you have seen in the last few years, and hopefully some improvement in our identification of the medical devices throughout the industry.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I think first and foremost, just given the growth of our company, we can say for certain that there is a large uptick in the adoption of UDI, since that is one of our primary focuses here at Symmetric. One thing I think is helpful for everyone to realize as it relates to adopting UDI is a hospital and healthcare providers in general are really procuring tens of thousands of different items every year. They buy more individual parts than even some of the largest manufacturers and car manufacturers. So it's quite a variety of items coming in the door. Now, when some of those items have barcodes and some of those don't, it becomes very difficult to make standard operating procedures for things such as receiving, counting items on the shelf, and all the way down to the patient use. But as of now, we're starting to see that over 90% of what hospitals are procuring do have barcodes and UDIs on the labels. Whether or not they're all perfectly formatted and correct is another story, but we are seeing that existing. And with that, we're seeing quite a few hospitals really start loading those in something called their item master, which is really just a database and a list of all the items that they procure and store in inventory, and then transmit that into their EHR, and really are starting all of this with point of use. So recording what's used during a procedure on the patient record and then working backwards. Some of the working backwards that we've seen that's pretty exciting is, for example, picking for a case, scanning the actual items that the material manager, inventory coordinator was printed out for a procedure and needed to bring to the case. Even more exciting from a materials management standpoint is we're seeing health systems receive by actually scanning the products, especially products coming in 3PL. And then finally, there's been quite a few pilots and more work towards looking at using UDI in the EDI process. And for those unfamiliar with EDI, it's really the electronic purchase orders, invoices, shipping notices that are used today. There is a lot of errors and mismatches that occur in lieu of using a UDI. Today, most people are using company names, part numbers, and then units of measure that aren't necessarily following any type of standard. And when you're trying to match those all up, that's very difficult. And using a UDI-DI in that process instead is much simpler since it's one value.
Yeah, did you have any additional comments there on Terry? I think you're aware of some of the regulations that might have also been implemented that touch on UDI.
Yeah. So one of the things that we recognized early on at FDA was that hospitals have a lot of priorities, just like all manufacturers. And in order to have a budget for adoption of UDI, they often would need some kind of regulatory push. Does that sound familiar? So we worked with the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services and the Office of National Coordinator for Health IT, which is another executive branch in the US government, to get requirements on hospitals to record the UDI, starting with implants. So CMS has come out really that the preferred method of identifying an implant in an electronic health record is with the UDI and about 6 fields from Good ID, and it's specifically called out in regulation. And then what's really going to be exciting, Rich and I just came back from a conference where we were talking all about UDI adoption, and one of the things that the hundreds of people in this materials management conference agreed on was that once UDI is in that ANSI X12, which is a standard, it's actually an electronic data interchange standard, EDI, but it's for claims. And if you don't know what claims data, it's how a hospital gets paid by CMS or an insurance company. There is a new standard that includes the UDI-DI in that claims data. It's expected to go live in 2023. So when the idea is that when hospitals start having to get paid, having to use UDI to get paid, the adoption will go up even higher. In addition to the fact that they're saving a lot of money, as we see at Symmetric, for implementing UDI naturally, but for those who are a little resistant to that or can't get buy-in, we think that will help. The other thing is you touched on in the QMS, the post-market regulations, that UDI be in recalls and in EMDR. And just for the audience, there is a learning UDI community that's hospitals, manufacturers, and others who've all come together, written to FDA, written to Congress, because they see that having the UDI in a recall saves them a tremendous amount of time. It's the same thing Rich was talking about, not being able to locate that recall on your shelves because you don't have that specific identifier. It's really been a call to action for a lot of hospitals, and we'll show later a graph about how UDI is in recalls right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's take a look at that graph. A lot of good information there. This is some stats that you folks have collected, and it looks like UDI is starting to appear on some of these particular reports and recall campaigns. So are you able to talk a little bit about this slide?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I know it was one of the questions, and I knew this slide was coming, was how much is it being used in recalls and adverse events? And the answer is sadly not too much yet. It's nice to see that there are some inclusions, but one thing to note here is there really isn't a standard field and format to submit to the FDA a recall with a UDI electronically. So this is actually taking UDIs out of free text where we're making these statistics. So we are seeing an uptick in the inclusion of UDIs on recalls, especially breaking out those implantables, since that would be probably the most important ones to note. But one thing is we really do need a standard field, an electronic submission to the FDA to include the UDI in recalls.
Yeah,
And that's
very
one
good.
of the things that learning UDI community wrote up and recommended too. So I was encouraged 2 days ago, New Zealand came out with a recall from their ministry that required GTINs in the recall specifically. So that was very encouraging. And I have heard from FDA in public forums that they are working to improve these statistics internally, and they are looking to work on EMDR as well. Right now it's redacted. The UDI is redacted from adverse event reports because it's thought of as personal information. But they're working very hard to change that process because a lot of hospitals would benefit, a lot of manufacturers would benefit from seeing adverse event reports with UDI.
Yeah. So the good news here is we're starting to see some adoption. I guess the bad news is it's not widely adopted, and we might have to come back for an annual webinar to see how we're doing next year. But hopefully this is the start of much further adoption through industry. Let's take a look at the next question here. The next one has to do with quality improvement, and I'm going to look to the panelists to try to give us some suggestions here. The quality of a medical device data is crucial in downstream use. It can be the difference that saves a life. What are your suggestions to improve the quality of provided data and facilitate industry's adoption of standardized UDI data. So let's start off with Terry. I think you have a very interesting experience that you'd like to share that relates to adoption in downstream use.
I guess one of the things I'd like to say is listen to your customers, encourage feedback from hospital customers, understand their processes. So my husband had surgery 3 weeks ago. I'm not a typical patient caregiver. I'm kind of a UDI advocate at the same time as a patient advocate. So I was in the room. A woman came in and she said, "Excuse me, I have to scan the IV pump and the compression machine." She left the room and I said, "Oh, she must have been scanning the UDI. This is so wonderful." So I looked on the pump and all I saw was an asset tag that the hospital had applied, and they're kind of tracking with their own information, not standardized, probably on spreadsheets. And I'm looking all over the UDI, and you can see me looking at the very bottom of that IV pump, and I pulled out my phone with the QR reader, and it was quite awkward to try and figure out. You can see there actually was a UDI. That's the last picture on the right, but I had to take that like practically on the floor, you know, to get the scan. And that in opposition, I have permission from 3M because this was in the same patient room. And this is a class 1 device. So we've talked about class 1. Do we need to, you know, have class 1 in good ID and have it marked? I absolutely say yes, because hospitals are using it not only for inventory, as Rich mentioned, but, you know, patient charging. If they can scan this beautiful UDI on this piece of, I mean, it's really just surgical tape. It's on the packaging. It's also on the box. So just 2 examples where I think there's room for improvement on the right, and on the left, 3M has gotten it correct.
Yeah, very
and
good.
Then the next, I think the next slide maybe.
Yeah, go into the detail fields that are very critical here.
Yeah, so it's not enough really to have scan the identifier. You need some attributes, standard attributes to go with that. We start out with those regulatory attributes, but over time we're transitioning that there are a set of core fields, no matter where you are in the world, across the healthcare ecosystem. These 10 or so, I think there's more than 10 maybe, appear to be the ones that support interoperability. Like capture this one, these 10, get these right, instead of, you know, like, okay, yes, you should meet all the regulatory requirements, but if you get a solid, you know, specifics on these fields, high quality, we'll really see a difference in UDI adoption, in patient safety, and everything else. And just like you mentioned, manufacturers obtaining data from many sources, well, hospitals and IT vendors do the same thing. And we, you know, should all be working toward manufacturers populating that database so that those in procurement and registries, patient safety, use the same information. The thing we haven't touched on a lot, except you mentioned it about feedback in the very beginning. One of the things I would say, especially for these fields here on this slide, is if you hear from your customers, and I think you're going to start hearing from FDA, but if you hear from your customers or IT vendors like Symmetric or many IT vendors now in this space, listen. Listen to what people are telling you about the gaps in your data. It's not correct. Please correct this. You don't have contact information, and make the change, because that person who's contacting you is representing thousands of people, thousands of hospitals and customers. And that change will make you be a standout manufacturer. You will get into the buzz of hospitals who say, wow, they're listening, they're making changes, they're updating their records, and good ID, we really appreciate this. So it's more than just regulation, it's about your customers.
Yeah, very good. I'm looking at the time. We have a couple questions to touch on yet. So on this next slide, Rich, maybe you could just very quickly summarize, the particular challenges out there that hospitals face regarding data.
Yeah, I think just managing that list of items, and one of the things to note we've kind of touched on here is there's a lot of other attributes and pieces of information that hospitals are continuously trying to add manually for other operations downstream, pieces of information for clinicians, for billing, etc. And having that core information, and touching on even what Terry said, of listening when people are reaching out about information, is really enabling a lot of these problems to be solved by reusing data that's already out there.
Yeah, very good. All right, so I think there's some call to action here, some actual practical steps that manufacturers can work on. Terry, do you want to hit these 4 points at a high level?
I think we've talked about them. So submit accurate data, absolutely, and as much as you can the first time through. Yep. Voluntarily comply. I mentioned the class 1, how important that is. Over the counter. When we first came out with the UDI regulation, there were no exceptions. We were trying to be really tough because, as Rich said, some barcode, some not. Doesn't make any sense to the people who are trying to use this standard.
Right.
That's the same for the third bullet point. Submit things that may not be required, but they are completely required for your customers. And then respond to customer feedback. That's so important. It's really frustrating, especially if you don't have a contact that's useful, that can help you. So. Right.
All right, very good. This is a good short list of action items to try to improve adoption. Just to kind of summarize this little section, I think it helps to spread UDI awareness throughout your organization. We emphasized a single source of accurate truth, making sure that you push and promote the UDI identifiers through all of your interactions with your downstream users, and whether it be through the service department or procurement, delivery, returns, emphasis on UDI, I think is going to permeate and eventually have a positive effect on the industry and eventual patient safety. All right, so let's get to another quick question here. What does this discussion, or how does this discussion change when we focus on the EU? So the MDR regulation and in vitro diagnostic regulation versus the US FDA. Ben, can you just really do a quick summary, maybe pick 1 or 2 items here when we do a comparison side to side with the FDA and EU? I think we kind of touched on, but just maybe quickly summarize the difference in the QMS approach.
Yeah, sure. So as you can see in the table already, there are some significant differences between the FDA and UDI. I think the biggest thing that's turning a lot of heads at the moment is establishing those economic operators and what they mean within the EU MDR, as well as the different approach to applying for things like CE certification, and specifically in the UK as well, that conformity assessment for UKCA as well. So there are some real things to consider when it comes to one versus the other, and that harmonization that we spoke about at the beginning is really going to help incorporate that sense of one source of truth versus trying to do multiple different things at the same time.
Right, very good. Let's move on. There's a couple more of these. Let's see. Terry, I think you had some comments about the different classes and the fact that they don't line up when you go from the FDA to EU.
Yeah, I mean, there are known differences. The manufacturers probably know this better than I do in their products. It's unfortunate. I wish we could all come together. UDI started as harmonized, and I wish we could keep trying to go towards that goal. The only other thing on this slide is the GMDN and EMDN, and we haven't talked about this either. Why in the world did FDA require GMDN? This gets to that use by other outside of FDA, in fact, where people are wanting to group devices in a more meaningful way than just using an FDA product code, and GMDN has met that need.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, you might have a comment on the European Union approach there and how this EMDN, can you kind of quickly summarize what's going on?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Yeah, this is where harmonization breaks down a bit when obviously the Commission have chosen a slightly different way of grouping devices using their own system. It's been very unpopular with different regulators around the world, this move. I think from our approach to it is still early days. We're hoping to make some persuade the Commission to at least work with us to help manufacturers submit data in a meaningful way. Some of you might be aware, GMDN members, that we do have a tool on our website to help with our EMDN identification. So try and use that. But we're still quite a way off before the UDMED deadline. So hopefully we can still do some work there before this gets really complicated. And we'll see what happens.
All right, very good. Last one, I'll just maybe have a quick comment here on some of the data that is used by the FDA versus the European Union. About twice as many data elements are collected. It's further complicated in the EU by having a two-tier data structure with a basic UDI grouping. And there's other issues when you identify legacy products and so on. We'll leave this for homework. The next question here, and this would be the last one, what strategic recommendations do you have in creating or revising QMS and UDI systems? Ben, can you give us a 2-minute quick answer here for getting the QMS up to speed? I think you focus on gap assessment.
I do. I think the one thing that I would always recommend is when you're transitioning from one version of a requirement over to another is to really have that strong gap assessment in place. And that derives from a really good, strong regulatory intelligence process. Like getting your feelers out there, understanding what the requirements are and when sort of the changes are predicted to happen, very similar to how we talked about the FDA transition to ISO requirements. So that then leads into that gap assessment, be able of a way of formalizing those changes. I think that's as high level as I can go.
Right. All right. Very good. We're going to move on. I'll cover very quickly here just the 5 steps for UDI implementation regarding the European region. Prepare your process, prepare your data, get the submission in place, make sure the labeling is up to speed with some additional requirements there, and then do the cutover, start producing those products. There's always this expansion, so unfortunately UDI is not the end. There are many additional health authorities around the world that are going to come into play. So this conversation continues. And Sonia, I don't think we have much time here, if any. Looks like we're at the top of the hour. So I apologize for not getting to some of the questions here from the audience. But we had a lot of good discussion. I think the takeaway is that data quality is very important, and getting it right, managing it, putting everything in place is absolutely crucial. And I'll hand this back over to you, Sonia.
All right, no problem. You know what? We do have time for one quick question. So Gary, if you want to go ahead and ask that one question. I know we had a lot of questions that came in from the audience. And audience members, you can continue sending in your questions, but we will not have time to go over them with our panelists, but they will follow up with you after this Q&A. So Gary, did you want to ask one question?
Let's see here. There was a question about, oh boy. Yeah, that one's pretty detailed. I'm not sure which one you were pointing to, Sonia.
Oh, maybe you can, I have one question here. Can you describe some differences between how the quality system requirements are enforced by the FDA versus non-notified body auditors, auditing style and potential regulatory repercussions of non-compliance? Maybe Ben can answer that quickly and then we'll end the webinar. So everyone hold on.
Right, yeah,
Sure.
very good enforcement.
No, I'm happy to answer that. So when it comes to FDA versus European or ISO auditors, the typical style is that we, there's that, I like to say FDA take the guilty until proven innocent approach versus ISO is very much the innocent until proven guilty. So what I mean by that is that you have to prove to your FDA auditors that you're meeting the requirements and that you're not putting your patient at any element of harm, whereas ISO is a little bit more relaxed in that respect. They want to make sure that you've got a requirement and you're following it appropriately. When it comes to that auditing style, like FDA is very much considered to be sort of the leaders in terms of QSIT style auditing, which we tend to use within our internal audit programs, versus the more structured sort of chapter and clause based approach that we use in MDSAP and ISO. I think those are probably the key differences, aside from the reporting structures, which can be a hole that we could fall into and take a bit too long to discuss.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what other corollary there? I have taken a look at some of the recent warning letters. If you search for UDI, it actually starts to pop up frequently. I think there's 10 warning letters that specifically mention violations regarding UDI not being handled properly and documented in systems. So it does appear that the FDA, as part of inspections, is now have UDI on their list, and I think there'll be some further level of review at that level. So Sonia, I think we're out of time there, but thank you for your help.
Okay, well, thank you very much for answering those questions, Gary, Terry, Ben, Mark, and Rich. We have reached the end of the question and answer portion of this webinar, and I know we couldn't attend to all your questions, but the team at ReadTech will follow up with you. And if you have any further questions, utilize the information that's on the screen right here. They'll be very happy to assist you. Thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve on our further webinars. Now give me a few seconds. I'm going to send you a link in your chat box. You'll be able to view the recording of this event on that page, and you can also share this link with your colleagues once they register for the recording as well. So I encourage you to do that. And get even more out of today's presentation by downloading the supporting materials that are available under the handouts tabs, and there's 4 there for you, or please go to ReadTech and check it out. Now please join us in thanking our speakers, Gary, Terry, Ben, Mark, and Rich. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
We hope you found this webinar informative. It has been my pleasure to be your webinar moderator. On behalf of the team here at X-Talks, we thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia Hunt. Until next time, please take care and bye for now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.